Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Amriteshwaryai Namaha. Om Parthaya Pratibodhitam Bhagavatam Narayanena Swayam Vyasena Gratitam Purana Munina Madhye Mahabharatam Advaitamritavarshinim Bhagavatim Ashtadashadhyayinim Ambatvam Anusandhadhami Bhagavad Gita Bhavadveshinim Namostute Vyasa Vishala Buddhe Pullara Yatapatra Netra Yena Tvaya Bharata Taila Purnaha Prajvalito Jnanamaya Pradipaha Prapanna Parijataya Totra Vetraikapanai Jnanamudraya Krishnaya Gitamrita Duhe Namaha Sarvopanishado Gavo Dogdha Gopala Nandanaha Partho Vatsya Sudhir Bhokta Dugdam Gitamritam Mahata Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagadgurum. Om Namah Shivaya. I think summer is officially over, if I'm not mistaken. No? Not yet? No. Seems to be becoming fall and just starting. But even though the seasons change, timeless wisdom doesn't change. So we can still study something that is over 5,000 years old. In the last class, we ended with verse 30, which was Karma Yoga in a nutshell. And now, the next two verses, he's going to, actually, from 31 to 35, he's going to be summarizing Karma Yoga from different angles, even though he's already given the teaching earlier in this chapter. So, verse 31 is about the benefits of performing Karma Yoga, and then verse 32 is about the disadvantages of not performing Karma Yoga. So we'll read verse 31. Can everybody hear me, or should we turn up the speaker? Perfect? Okay.
They're saying they can't hear you very well.
Oh, because we used to have a line connected to that, I think.
Yeah, and I guess Melinda said that we don't have it today because we have this instead.
Yeah.
I'm not really sure. I don't think changing the angle of this is going to make
I mean, you could just put the computer here next to me.
If you can, is there an 8-inch output for that? Because I have an idea if there's the 8-inch output for this.
The first few classes, we kept it right next to me because that was the only way.
Let's do that.
Until we get the speaker fixed.
It's just that if a thing pops up here saying
Just mute the computer completely.
this is muted,
Okay, good.
but if someone calls in, then you just have to click it and say add to group. If it's going to be here.
I won't do it while I'm chanting. Okay, let's chant verse 31 together. Ye me matam idam nityam anutishtanti manavaha shraddhavanto nasuyanto muccante tepi karmabhihi. Okay. Who shall we have? Oh, we don't have a mic for the people to read, so we can just read from anywhere. So, how about Swarna? You haven't read for some time. Can you read? Are you on verse 31 right now? Verse 31. You can just read his book.
I got it.
You got it? Just read the English. You don't have to read the Sanskrit.
Those men who are possessed of faith, who do not find fault, and always follow the teaching of mine, they too are liberated from action.
Very good. All right. So, this is the benefit of doing karma yoga. You get liberated from action. We're going to talk about what that means. What does it mean to be liberated from action? Some of us may not feel like that's important. You know, I like doing a lot of things, maybe. So why do I want to be liberated from action? We'll talk about that a little in a moment. But we should first talk about this attitude that he is describing. Because he's saying, he's basically telling us that karma yoga is not doing a job at a particular time. It is the attitude you have in doing all your actions all the time. So he's focusing on that attitude. He just says two things basically here. So it means this is the attitude you need in order to practice the teaching. It's not saying that by doing that you are practicing the teaching. He's saying this is what you need in order to do it. And he says two things: faith, and it's translated sometimes in Indian translations as non-cavilling. I love that word, non-cavilling. We don't even know what cavilling is to begin with, so what is non-cavilling, right? So cavilling, it's the way it's translated here, which is not fault-finding, basically. So if you're finding faults all the time, arguing all the time, you're not going to learn anything. You know, you may remember from your education, especially college. You know, high school, it's not so prevalent, but in college, some people are always asking questions to kind of like shoot down the professor and trying to show their intelligence, and just for the sake of argument, they just ask lots of questions. That would be what you would call cavilling. And then you'll probably find that they're not really focusing on what the person's saying. So he says, first thing is faith. Faith in what? Faith in the efficacy of what Lord Krishna is talking about, karma yoga. Because karma yoga requires us to live in a way that kind of goes contrary to what the mind wants us to believe. The mind wants us to believe that material gain and all the worldly pleasures are the key to happiness. And that's what modern society wants us to believe. That's what all the advertisements want us to believe. You know, the latest, greatest thing, you have to get it. And without this, you're incomplete and you're inferior compared with the other person. You can see the psychology that they use in all these advertisements. They'll show somebody with that thing in their hand and they're so happy, and they'll show somebody else who's not happy, and you're the unhappy person because you don't have it. Right? So this is the psychology. So this is what the mind has become socialized to believe. But karma yoga is saying, actually, material gain is secondary. The main gain in life to be acquired is spiritual gain. And this is how you do it. It requires a little effort and some sacrifice, but you're going to be happier in the long run. So you say, yeah. You know, at the Gita class, it makes sense. And then when you're off on your own and you're doing something in the world and you drive past that designer mall on whatever, 88 or something like that, you might think, I want to go in there and buy something. And then you go inside and then, you know, basically the mind gets deluded into believing the usual line of reasoning. So we need faith. We need to believe that what Krishna is talking about is really true. So without that, it's impossible for us to even practice the science of karma yoga, not to mention get the benefits. And for better or for worse, karma yoga and virtually everything in spirituality cannot be proven scientifically. In a way, it's good that you don't try to prove it scientifically because it's beyond science. But if the mind is looking for logic and reasoning and proof, it's not forthcoming so much in the case of karma yoga. The only way to verify it is to practice it. But in order to practice it and experience the benefits of karma yoga, you need to have faith in it. Right? If Amma says, do this, go do some selfless service, you'll feel better afterwards. How do you know? You have to do it. But then you have to believe her in order to go do it. So that's why faith is a very important precondition. But Amma does say there's a lot of empirical evidence that the opposite is true. If you seek all of your happiness in the world and in material gains, there's a lot of evidence that you don't become happy, because people who are very well-to-do in their big houses commit suicide, they have problems, they fight with each other. There's a lot of evidence to the contrary, so that if our mind says to us, this is not the way to go, then we can always say, well, look at the people who are pursuing what you're pursuing. They're not happy anyhow. So why should I follow what you have to say? This is how we sort of keep the mind at bay. So Amma often reminds us that in her satsang. She'll say that, many people in their air-conditioned houses commit suicide. So she says, it's better to air-condition the mind. Even if you can't air-condition the house, if you can air-condition your mind, you're doing well. And if you go to villages in developing countries, rural villages, you'll see some of the happiest people. I've been to rural villages in many different countries, and some of the most peaceful, contented, and just seem to be just so happy people are in these places. They don't have anything, in terms of material possessions, but a lot of them are just contented where they are. So, in a way, we can become envious of these people, even though they don't have the material wealth that we have here. And we also can remember that faith doesn't mean that we have to say that material possessions and material gains don't matter at all and they're unnecessary. We're not going to that extreme. It's just to say that we're willing to sacrifice some degree of that for the sake of our spiritual growth. That's all we're talking about. And Amma encourages us to try to see the difference between our lifestyle requirements, whatever our lifestyle may require. If we have children, or we have to take care of our parents, or if we have responsibilities, that's a lifestyle requirement. But requirements for happiness, she says, are totally different. Just because your lifestyle requires one thing doesn't mean that that's actually a requirement for happiness. So having kids in your house is your lifestyle requirement, but when they become bigger and grow up and leave, they don't need us anymore. So having them around is not a requirement for happiness, or shouldn't be a requirement for happiness, because they ultimately leave us behind. So clarity about all these things will help us practice karma yoga with faith. And when we talk about faith, we should be clear that it's not, anything that can be demonstrated definitively and decisively, scientifically, or is self-evident. That is not something that qualifies as faith. We don't say, I have faith that the sun is warm or something like that. This is a axiomatic truth. What we have to have faith in is things that cannot be proven, things that are beyond our control, things that are not scientifically established. That's what we need to have faith in. And most of spirituality falls into that category. Has to be practiced. And the other quality, he says, is that difficult word, anasuyantaha, which means those who are free from spitefulness, who are free from that fault-finding tendency. And it also includes a kind of jealousy. So he puts it as a prerequisite for practicing karma yoga, because you have to understand what it is you're practicing. And if you are constantly fault-finding with the teaching and even the teacher, perhaps Krishna. Arjuna could say, well, maybe Krishna is just trying to get me to do his own bidding. Maybe he has some ulterior motive here. Maybe that's why he's trying to get me to do this. So then he's not going to learn anything about karma yoga if he thinks like that. And, some people may show interest on the surface, but inside they're actually questioning everything that we say. And they're filled with confusion, their own confusion and contentiousness. So, even without reason, like we said a moment ago, they may just start arguing over the points that a person makes. I'll tell you an example from around Amma. Once during darshan, a man came up to Amma, and it was during, he was about to have his hug. And even though you're not supposed to bow down at Amma's feet because it slows down the line, he insisted on doing a full sashtanga pranamam, which means his whole body, he just, prostrated on the floor. And the people were like, please get up, And so finally he got up, and then he went for his darshan, and Amma was hugging him and smiling at him. And then after, she started talking, he spoke Amma's language, so she was talking with him, and then he said, actually, the other day Amma did such and so, why did you do it like that? I didn't understand, that didn't make any sense. He was actually questioning Amma for why she did something a particular way the other day. So that bowing down before the Guru is supposed to symbolize complete surrender. And the next breath, we're questioning, why Amma does something. So we're on the surface, we may behave one way. On the inside, our mind can be questioning. So it's very hard for us to absorb anything from Amma if that's how our mind behaves. And Amma may say something, and then in order to believe it, we may have to go verify it and see whether it's really true or not, instead of just believing what she says. So these are all the doubting tendency of our mind. So we really need to free ourselves from that. And if the mind questions the veracity of, say, for example, what Krishna is saying, or especially what Amma is saying, because we've met Amma personally, we can respond to our mind, look, if what Krishna is saying was not convincing or true, or not based on some real facts and reality, then why are people remembering his teaching after 5,000 plus years? Are people going to remember what I had to say 5,000 years from now? Are people going to even remember that I existed on the planet? Am I smarter than Krishna? Just think about it. There will be things that the mind will say, it'll start arguing and try to destabilize our faith in these things. We just have to have these responses ready in our back pocket. Say, look, Krishna knows a lot more than you do. Just keep quiet. Let's just keep doing our karma yoga, and we will be better later. You'll see. And I'll be detached from you also. As we mature more, we will be able to see that the problem was with our own understanding and interpretation of the teaching, not with the teaching. So if we have these two key qualities, what is the benefit that we get? We're liberated from karma, from action. Now that liberation from karma can be looked at in two ways. If we look at it from the sake of just mere the consequences of actions, not so much karmically, but just our own daily experience. Typically, the consequences of our actions are action, reaction, action, reaction. It's like a chain, endless chain, cycle. And that means that the reactions that we have are typically the emotional roller coaster. There will be anxiety, sadness, frustration, and reactions of all kinds to the actions that we perform. So we can say that liberation means liberation from all of those symptoms of our actions, immature attitude towards our actions that are not karma yoga. And Amma has said that when we perform our actions with a selfless attitude, it's like taking a shot, a vaccination, before you go to an infected area. So that attitude of detachment before we do our actions is like taking a vaccination, inoculation, before you go to an area that's infected with a particular disease. You can be in that infected area, but it's not affecting you. You're not getting the disease yourself. So she says that detachment before we enter into the field of action and do a lot of things is that inoculation that we need. The other way of understanding what he said is what we talked about last time, which is freedom from action means complete freedom from the notion that I am doing this. That doership notion disappears, and no action is actually transpiring. It's just, like we said last time, the gunas are acting on the gunas. The qualities of our body and subtle body are interacting with the qualities in the world, the gunas of the world. They're just interacting as they always would. I'm just witnessing the whole thing. So in that sense, that's liberation. So that would mean there's no doer at all, and we're completely free from action. Now, Krishna always himself will give the counter argument to his own arguments to help us, think things through fully. So the next verse is about what happens if I don't do it that way? What if I don't do it with the right attitude? So what? Who cares? So Krishna says, okay, this is why you should care. He explains that in verse 32. Ye tvetad abhyasuyanto nanutishtanti me matam sarvajnana vimudham sthan vidhi nashtan achetasaha. Okay. So we can just keep going. Marla, why don't you read the next English? Verse 32, chapter 3.
No?
Page 111.
But those who find fault and do not follow my teaching, know them to be deluded about all knowledge, doomed and senseless.
It's a pretty categorical statement, right? Deluded about all knowledge, deluded and senseless. So it doesn't sound like he wants us to go down that path. It's a pretty severe way of pointing it out. But it makes sense that if you're finding fault with the teaching or with the teacher, if we find fault with Amma or what she says, we're definitely not going to practice what she says. So he's saying that they're not, it's not that he cares whether we respect him or, actually practice the teaching for his sake. He's not arguing it to try and establish his theory of this and, get a tenure in a university or something like that. He's just saying it for Arjuna's sake and for the sake of the future generations. So, he's basically pointing out, and he even said earlier that yajna, or that attitude of sacrificing for the sake of a greater good, that is a law that is incorporated into the entire universe. He said yajna, or that offering, is it's one of the laws of the universe, and basically that means there's no escape from it. We have to follow these laws of the universe. All of the animals offer something, everything in nature offers something. Even the monarch butterflies that everybody is enjoying so much now, they're offering the beauty. Their form itself is just beautiful. It's so attractive and delightful. And then they pollinate everything for us, and then they die. They offer their body, and it becomes food for something else, or they just become fertilizer for the next plant. So anyhow, that law of yajna, or offering, can work for or against us depending on our attitude. If we dislike it, and if we don't live in accordance with that law, we're going to face a lot of suffering in life, because give and take is part of life in the world. But if we live according to that law and we incorporate it into our lives, we can grow spiritually as a result. For example, Amma says gravity is an inescapable law of this world. It's not a question of whether you like gravity or dislike gravity. You have to live your life in accordance with the reality of gravity. So that means if you have a breakable item in your hand, like a glass, you have to walk carefully. That's the example she gives. You have to be very careful as you're walking with it. You can't drop it. So similarly, this karma or karma yoga is a law of the universe. So that being the case, we have to perform our actions with a lot of awareness so that we can leverage that law of karma yoga for the sake of our benefit. And he's talking about people who are fault-finding, who are studying, they're learning the teaching, for example, from Krishna, but finding fault with the teacher and constantly questioning. So you'll find that there are some people in the world who study spirituality just for the sake of negating it. Have you ever met anybody like that? There are people, they're curious to know because they want to shoot it down. They may be like atheistic-minded people, or sometimes religious missionaries do the same thing. Has anybody ever heard of that? You may have heard of a scholar named Max Muller or Monier Williams, the guy who wrote that huge Sanskrit dictionary in the 19th century. Max Muller tried to get the Bowdoin Scholarship for Sanskrit Studies at Oxford. And Monier Williams got it. And he made this big dictionary. That scholarship that they were both interested in was established for the sake of converting Indian people to Christianity, actually. It was a scholarship for studying Sanskrit just for the purpose of converting Indian people to Christianity. Can you believe it? And here's a quote from a letter that Max Muller wrote. I'm just saying, he's an example of a 19th century scholar whose sole purpose of studying Sanskrit was to convert Indian people to Christianity. He said, "The Veda is the root of their religion, and to show them what the root is, I feel sure, is the only way of uprooting all that has sprung from it during the last 3,000 years. The ancient religion of India is doomed, and if Christianity does not step in, whose fault will it be?" Such a categorical statement. And he is regarded even by many Indians today as the greatest Sanskrit scholar that ever lived. Can you believe that? Why would people think such a thing when he's basically trying to, destroy their ancient tradition? But this is an example of somebody who studies spirituality assiduously with that fault-finding attitude. They don't learn anything. Ultimately, he never went to India, actually. Max Muller never went to India once. So it's just a sad example, but we don't want to become like that. So we study to grow, not to disprove something. And our attitude determines what we get out of those studies. If you read, has anybody read the Puranas before? Some of India's ancient epics, Puranas, okay? So depending on your understanding and your attitude when you read these scriptures, you can get really high Vedantic philosophy out of those Puranas, or you can become totally confused. Anybody ever felt confused reading the Puranas? I'm raising my hand just because I did. The gods are getting angry at each other and cursing each other, and the sages are doing crazy things. I mean, what is going on here, right? There's a purpose behind it. In fact, I even went and asked one of the Swamis in Amrita Puri, early on, I was like, I'm totally confused. Why should I be reading this? He says, look, study Vedanta first, then read the Puranas. Then it'll make much more sense. You have to understand certain philosophical principles before you read these. Otherwise, they're just like crazy stories and we get confused. So there's two different types of knowledge in the Vedas, or in any of India's scriptures. One is knowledge of right and wrong. That is dharma and adharma. That comes in what is called the karma kanda of the Vedas, or the scriptures. And then there's the knowledge of reality and non-reality, or self, non-self, the eternal, the non-eternal. That comes in what is called the jnana kanda. So the first part deals with actions, second part deals with knowledge. So when you're talking about actions, you need to know what's the difference between right and wrong, because right and wrong applies for actions. But if you want to know what is eternal and what is not eternal, then you turn to a different portion of the scriptures, like, for example, Bhagavad Gita, or you turn to, like, the Upanishads, or to Amma's teachings. So, but if we have this attitude of questioning, we won't learn either type of knowledge. That's the problem. You won't get anything out of the studies. So that's what he's saying, that, if we have that wrong attitude, and if we don't get the benefit out of that, we don't even learn about spirituality. We don't even learn about right or wrong. So our life as a human being has been wasted. Because the sole purpose of a human life is to grow spiritually, or at least to follow Dharma. That's why he says people are ruined in life spiritually as a result. It's because they have wasted the whole human birth. And Amma says that if we waste this human birth, what is the difference between us and the animals or the worms, right? You remember that point I pointed out before. And sometimes, when I was reviewing this verse, I was looking out the window of my room, and I saw the squirrels running around fighting with each other. And I thought, wow, if we waste this human birth, what's the difference between us and the squirrels? Because they're fighting over their territory. This is my house, and, stay away. And there was one bird who was peeking in the hole of the squirrel, and he went running over and chased away the bird. Like, you're going to steal my food. And human beings also have territorial nature. We are very possessive, we're argumentative, we get upset. So this is the same thing that a squirrel's doing. So how are we different from the squirrel is what Amma would ask us. They're also residents in Chicago Ashram, right? So maybe they're better than us. At least they're doing something that's good for nature, aerating the ground, and they're creating, and we're not doing anything that's even good for nature. So we have to be very careful that we don't waste this human birth by not following that teaching. And another thing that Amma reminds us is that it's after so many births, non-human births, that we finally attained this human birth. So it takes, maybe we preserved this human birth over a couple times because if we lived properly, if we followed spiritual principles, maybe we're born as a human a few times. But before that, think how long we had to go through this evolutionary cycle where we finally went from a worm to an animal to a deer to a monkey, or maybe then we became a human being. So it is if we don't use this birth for the unique purpose that it's given, then there's no guarantee when we'll get our next human birth. So in that sense also he means doomed, because it may take many lifetimes before we get another human birth. He says it even more categorically in chapter 16, verse 19. I'll let you look at that later because I don't want to scare anybody. He says that this is what happens if you have malicious intentions, blah, blah. So that's a little scary, so it makes us take his teaching a little more seriously. So then let's say the question comes up. Okay, I got it. Normal action leads to karmic bondage and suffering. And karma yoga leads to liberation. Not directly, but ultimately. So if that's the case, who in their right mind would do just plain old actions with attachment? Why doesn't everybody do karma yoga and get liberation? Let's say you can ask that question. So he now answers this hypothetical question in the next two verses. Verse 33. Sadrisham cheshtate swasyaha prakrtir jnanavanapi prakritim yanti bhutani nigraha kim karishyati. Okay. Caroline, can you read verse 33 for us?
Creatures follow their own nature. Even the enlightened man acts according to his own nature. What can restraint accomplish?
Okay. So, in order to understand this, it's good if we talk about the two different primary factors that can influence or govern our lives. He talks about one thing here. He says prakriti. Prakriti. Anybody know what prakriti means? who learned that later in life, maybe didn't grow up with it in their language. What does prakriti mean? Nature, okay. But we typically think of nature as like nature out there, right? Mother Nature. What does it mean here? Swabhava. What does that mean? People act according to their nature. Isn't that what he says? Isn't that how they translate it? Creatures follow their own nature. Okay. So what does that mean? Some kind of inherited tendency, right? We're born into this world with some kind of inherited tendency from our past lives. Of course, we're born as human beings, so we have that human nature, but at the same time, not all human beings are the same. Everybody's different. That means each person is born with a different inherited tendency from a past life. That's one factor. The other factor is spirituality. So spirituality is also a factor that can govern our lives. So a guru, a realized master like Amma, spiritual teachings like what Krishna is giving, and Amma also says that nature is a spiritual teaching, so we can learn spirituality from Mother Nature. Whatever the case is, there's these two primary influences on our life. So here he's talking about prakriti, your inborn tendency that you have when you come into this world. It doesn't mean it's inherent, it doesn't mean it's your true nature. He's already talked about that. That's the self, the higher self. This is that tendency we're born with that's in our subtle body. It's the impressions from past lives. So earlier I had talked about the gunas. I had said, just as an example, I'm not trying to, say everybody should look at their horoscope, but as an example of how it manifests, everybody's horoscope shows how these different qualities of tamas, rajas, and sattva play out in their lives. One area we have sort of lethargic, darker energy. Another area we have very pure energy, or it may be, kind of confined, or it may be very powerful. The rajasic energy may be very powerfully manifested in another area of life. So that combination, there's infinite variations in that. And everybody's horoscope shows, for example, how that plays out in that person's life. So Krishna is going to say later in the Gita that the proportion of these qualities, of these three gunas, by birth, is what determines your real place in society, not your actual family of birth. So in other words, what kind of mental qualities that person has, that determines what he or she can do well in society. It doesn't mean that if you are born into a janitor's family, you have to be a janitor also. Some people misunderstand the Indian social structure. What he says is that it's the mental qualities that determine that. And he elaborates more in chapter 4. So we'll get to that sometime, relatively soon. So, he's saying that you can't really control those so much. It sounds like a fatalistic argument, but we're going to find out what he really means in the next verse. But for the time being, here he says, restraining that inherited tendency is not going to amount to much. It's a very powerful factor. So it's better to pursue your life, or live your life with an understanding of what your prakriti is, your nature is. So there are suitable occupations for people of all different kinds of mindsets. And if you try to change your occupation based on some fleeting desire when it doesn't really suit your mental composition, it's going to be suffering. You see, some people have like a fleeting interest in something and they jump into some field and it turns out that it doesn't suit them at all. They may have a real artistic mindset and they're going after something that doesn't suit them, or they have a scientific mind, analytical mind, and they're trying to do something that doesn't fit them. It creates a lot of strain and tension for them. So if you love what you do, because it goes with your mental makeup, then it means there'll be less stress, tension, and more inner growth. So the question here is, what is Arjuna's mental makeup? Does anybody have any sense of what that is? Arjuna, who's the person Krishna is talking to.
He's a warrior, isn't he?
He's a warrior. What do we know? Do we know anything in specific about how that warrior tendency manifested in Arjuna before this Gita part of the Mahabharata? Was he a reluctant warrior, or was he just... Was he? Not before. Before this war came, he used to love to fight. From childhood onwards, they were always, you know how young boys always like to play cops and robbers and all these things. These guys were the penultimate cops and robbers. They used to just love fighting. And then when they got old enough, they would go out and, what do you say? Take care of the bad guys. And they called them demons in the story. They called them asuras, right? So it makes it very clear that they're evildoers. So it was okay. They would fight them and chase them out of the villages, and they would defeat all kinds of demons. And Arjuna was basically fighting his whole life. And if you've read the Mahabharata, do you remember what happened after they were banished to the forest for 13 years? Was Arjuna making use of the time to meditate and chant his mantra and everything, or what was he doing?
Ridding the forest of villains.
Huh?
He's fighting demons.
He was fighting demons, and he was also gnashing his teeth the whole time. I just can't wait to get back and defeat these guys and take back the kingdom, right? That was what he was thinking about the whole time. Suddenly, when he gets on the battlefield and he looks, oh my gosh, I like those guys. I have a lot of attachment to them. Suddenly he's like, no, I don't think I want to be a warrior anymore, And his whole life he's enjoying. He even fought with Shiva. He went to, I think it was Indra's help, and he fought with Shiva, and he fought so valorously that Shiva was impressed and gave him this bow, Gandiva bow. I think that's how the story runs. So, anyhow, if he could even impress Shiva, he was a good warrior. And he enjoyed it. So now he's in the position of like a judge who has to punish his or her own child for their wrongdoing. It's not an easy thing to do. If your child is the accused one and they're guilty and you're the judge, what do? They wouldn't put you in that position. They would put somebody else there. But let's say it were you. It's not easy. You'd say, just be lenient this time, one person, It's not easy to mete out justice when you have attachment to the person. That's why Arjuna suddenly starts talking about becoming a sannyasi or a mendicant and leaving society and etc. He has an unpleasant duty that he has to perform. So same thing happens for other people in their family lives. And I'll tell you another story that took place around Amma. A guy came for darshan. We have stories about men tonight. I can say it's a woman, but this story, runs much better if you know that it's a man. So he came for darshan and with his wife, and he said to Amma, I'm ready to just leave everything and come to Amritapuri. Come to your ashram in Amritapuri by myself. And the wife is like, what? And then, Amma's, no fool, right? She knows there's two different types of people who want to come to Amritapuri. There's the people most people have a sincere spiritual thirst and hunger. Occasionally you find the escapists who are trying to come to Amritapuri to escape their problems. So she started asking more, questions and talking. So what is it? What happened? And then you start asking the wife and everything. What it turns out is that, whenever they start fighting, he says to his wife, that's it, I'm just going to Amritapuri and I'm just going to leave. I'm done with this whole life in the world, And then finally they were fighting so much and he said that so many times that she said, okay, fine, go ahead, you go. The problem is he didn't have the courage to go to Amritapuri either. So after this, she came back and told Amma, look, he says that all the time. He doesn't really mean it. I called his bluff and he's not going to Amritapuri anyhow. So this is the problem. It's not an escape route from our problems. So then he talks about the enlightened one, right? Enlightened person. So we can see that even the lives of enlightened or realized masters vary. If you look at Ramana Maharishi and someone like Shankaracharya, they're totally different. Kabir, all these different great sages of the past have lived totally different lives. So they have also some kind of gunas, you could say, some kind of qualities. The difference is that they're not, bound by them, but still they follow their prakriti. Amma was born into a fishing village. She lives the life of a fisherman's daughter. She wears those clothes, she speaks that language, she abided by that for some time. Everybody has certain qualities that they live. So he's saying, how are you going to be free from these qualities if even the Mahatmas abide by them? Now, when he says that argument, we should not be deluded. Is Amma really confined by her place of birth and these qualities that she inherited at birth? Swarna knows, right? So, if we were to say, what's the difference between them? Which one's better? It's like saying which infinity is better. This infinity is better or that infinity is better. Because once they realize the self, they have become one with infinity, with the totality. So then they've merged, there's no ego left. So they're all essentially realizing the same self. So it's like comparing the Pacific Ocean and the Atlantic Ocean. You say, which one's bigger? I bet Punya knows the answer. Which one's bigger, Pacific Ocean or Atlantic Ocean? Maybe she doesn't know. Okay. But remember, it's still not wrong. Are the oceans connected or are they not connected? They're connected. Are there really two oceans then? No, right? All the oceans are connected on the planet. So that's like saying, the Pacific Ocean is bigger than Atlantic Ocean. But they're really all connected. What is it that gives them the shape? It's the land. It's not that the water has a shape. So like that, Amma is merged in the infinite. She's completely identified with the totality. The gunas or the qualities or the nature that that a realized being seemingly has, are just like the land masses that surround the ocean. It's not a quality of the ocean, it's a quality of the land mass. So Amma herself doesn't have any qualities. She's beyond all name and form. But in order to adjust with society and come down to our level, she adopts these qualities herself. It's for our sake. So Krishna is saying that better than suppression, trying to suppress your inherited tendency, live in accordance with that, understand it, and follow it. Doesn't mean you have to be a slave to it. That's what we're going to get to in the next verse. It means he just says, don't try to suppress it. And sometimes if you see how Amma gives advice to children whose parents have been devotees for a long time, and then their kids are getting older and they're going to go to high school and college, it's surprising how often she recommends the kids to go in the same line as the parents. I've seen it happen time and time again. And there may be something behind it. That's the traditional society. You had these apprenticeships, you had these guilds, and then they would learn from their parents, and it was easier that way. You've already, by the time you're 18 or 20, you already know a lot about what your parents do. So you don't have to start learning an entirely different profession. It makes it faster. And sometimes you're born into that family because you have that tendency as well. So, not always, but I've seen her do it before. So, people pick up their profession much faster, less stress, less hassle. And they can focus their mind on spirituality as well. So, that Prakriti has been defined, that inherited tendency has been defined by Shankaracharya as the impressions acquired in the previous births, which remain in the form of vasanas, those subtle tendencies, in the subconscious mind. And they manifest at the right time. So all these impressions that we have created and we're creating now, right? Whatever impressions we're creating now in this life, if there's a next life for us, hopefully not, but if we don't realize the Atman before we leave this body, which is entirely possible still, that means that these impressions we're creating right now are going to be affecting our next life. And we'll be carrying those with us as well. So, and the different circumstances of this life are going to bring out those vasanas in our mind. So, some of you may have heard of some child prodigies. Anybody know any examples of child prodigies who, at a very young age, demonstrated a great ability to do certain things? Anybody can think of someone like that? Huh? Beethoven? Mozart. Yeah, Mozart I think was the one who did it. Both, Beethoven was probably no slouch, I would say. Yeah. Okay, so what about anybody else? In recent days, I remember there was somebody sent me a video about showing a 2-year-old boy playing the tabla. This was maybe like almost 10 years ago. I was so surprised. He was playing the tabla right to the talam, right to the beat. You cannot say that's a fluke, right? So these kind of, and what dragged Einstein towards mathematics? At a young age, he revolutionized the field of physics. So these unseen forces are the vasanas, or the things that drag us towards one thing or another. Be nice if our prakriti or our inherent nature dragged us towards spirituality. That, if Amma were a normal person, which she's not, but if she were, that would be an example. In her life, she was always, from a very small age, drawn towards spirituality. And that second factor is spirituality. So, between the two of these, we know what spirituality is, right? We're going to go into that in the next verse more. But he's saying that inherited tendency from our past life is more powerful at present than our spirituality. Our spirituality is like a little sapling or a seedling that's just sprouted, and it can be easily overpowered by our nature. So don't try to suppress that. Now he's making it sound rather hopeless, right? You have to submit to your nature. People might think, well, there's no hope. What do? We just give in to our nature and let ourselves become a slave of that? And he says, no. And he tells us why we don't have to do that in the next verse. The first part of this verse has to be chanted all at once, or it's hard to divide it. Indriyasyendriyasyarthe Ragadveshau Vyavasthitau Tayor Navasham Agached Tauhyasya Paripantinau. Okay. Can you give your book to Shripad so he can read the verse, Mirabai? I think he hasn't got a chance. Did you read yet? Okay, good. First time. Can read the English of verse 34. It's at the top of the 34. Yeah, the top. It starts with.
The attachment
Yes.
and aversion of each sense are located in the object of that sense. Let no man come under their sway, for both indeed are enemies besetting his path.
Okay. So in the previous verse, it sounds like we're sort of doomed to be controlled by those inherited tendencies or vasanas. But Shankaracharya in his commentary says that if it were really true that we could not control our inherited tendency, then all of the scriptures and all of the teachers of all the Mahatmas are a waste. What's the purpose of Amma's teachings? What's the purpose of Amma's Chicago program? Even every year coming here, why would she do this for over 2 decades? If we can't change our inherited tendencies, there's no point in her even coming here. She'll just say, good luck, best of luck. I'll be here in Amritapuri, and see you when you come here. So it's a pretty sad prospect if we can't change it. It also means that Krishna has no reason to give this teaching to Arjuna in the form of 700 verses in the Bhagavad Gita, if there's no hope of Arjuna changing his nature. So all of it is a waste otherwise. So what it boils down to is that it is not impossible, but it's not easy either. That's what he's saying. We can change our nature, our inherited tendencies, but it requires some effort. It depends on the nature that we have inherited, it can require strenuous effort sometimes also. But there's no option. What if we don't change our nature? If we don't change our inherited tendencies, what's the alternative? Whatever we're dealing with now, suffering. Huh? More of the same, more suffering. We assume that people are trying to transcend their suffering, and that's why they're here. That's why they're reading the Bhagavad Gita. That's why they, are very much interested in Amma, because they know that otherwise it's just going to be reruns, the same TV show over and over and over again, like from, Groundhog Day, yeah. It's like if you don't at least try to change your nature, it's like watching the same episode of the same TV show over and over again your whole life. Yeah, like Groundhog Day, I guess you could say. Right. So anyhow, it's very much like, I like to compare it with the whole concept of Ayurvedic Prakriti. Anybody know about the Ayurvedic Prakriti? Now, what does Ayurvedic Prakriti mean? You want to take a stab at that, Dealu?
Vata, Pitta, and Kapha. People have different constitutions.
Right.
And you could be Vata, Pitta, or Kapha, and it's the
Prakriti, yeah.
Constitution.
Now, are you just clearly Vata or I'm Kapha? It's a mixture of them. Does that sound familiar, like being a mixture of three other things? What's that? Rajas, Tamas, Sattva. Just like we have a mixture of these three gunas, we also have a mixture in the body of Kapha, Pitta, Vata. And actually, those three, what they call doshas in Ayurveda, are very clearly delineated in the form of the three gunas as well. So there's it's all very well integrated and synthesized. But what does Ayurveda, anybody know what Ayurveda tells us about our body Prakriti? Sorry? You can balance it. Does it change fundamentally, completely? No. See, that is the thing. That is the thing. It doesn't actually change permanently. It stays the same. But you can balance it. So the thing about that is, it's the physical body, primarily, that we're talking about. I mean, and there's the subtle body to some degree. The energetic body is involved as well in Ayurveda. But basically, you can't change it because it's much more sthula, it's much more concrete. But the mind is much more subtle. We can change it even more. But at the same time, just like the body Prakriti, the body nature is not going to change overnight. The Ayurvedic doctor, if you go to Amritapuri, and I know him, well, Murali is his name. He's a really wonderful guy. If you tell him, these days I'm having a little bit of this going on in my body, can you help me? I said, no problem. Give me 6 weeks. Just come and live in the hospital and just surrender yourself to me for 6 weeks. I'll fix it for you. And I'm sure he could fix it in 6 weeks. But most people are like, 6 weeks? It's like, no, thanks, So, but the thing is, it requires effort. It's not a question of just taking a pill. Because we know that the pills that fix things typically have side effects, right? So if you want a real fundamental solution to your problem, you have to be ready to dedicate yourself to it. The alternative is there, and that's suffering. So you choose. We want suffering, or you want to make your fundamental change in yourself. So here, Lord Krishna is establishing our free will. He's saying it's not a matter of fate, and you're just doomed to the slavery to your vasanas. You can transform yourself, and he's establishing the role of free will in this process. So indirectly, he's saying you're different. You're not an animal. You're not a groundhog. You're not a ground squirrel like you have in the ashram. You have a difference, which is you can use your free will, you can use your discernment to make a change in your mind and work towards liberation intentionally. So the point is that he's saying Prakriti, or the inherited tendency we have, cannot make us act. It creates likes and dislikes, or what we call raga dvesha in Sanskrit. The inherited tendencies create likes and dislikes in our mind, and those likes and dislikes determine how we react to the environment around us, right? So they can at most say, make us feel, oh, I like that. Like, for example, Deyadev, what's your favorite food? Just random. Huh?
Palak paneer.
Palak paneer. So let's say we have a big bowl of palak paneer on the table. And you look at that. Just instinctively you're going to have a reaction, right? You say, oh, my favorite dish. Okay? So what's your least favorite? What's an example of food that you really don't like, Mirabai? Yeah. It's okay. You can share if you don't mind. We're family here, right? Anybody want to name a food that they really don't like? Onions. You don't like onions, huh? Okay. So there you go. You have a bowl of garlic or onions on the table. Paurnami says, oh, I want to make a nice salad for Shane. He's been gone for a few days. Big bowl of onions on the table. Can you avoid looking at that and saying, oh my God, she's just got this, she's out to get me, putting the onions on the table. You can't avoid that reaction because you have that inherited tendency from a past life. Or maybe even this life you acquired it. So that inherited tendency makes you feel or think, oh, I love that, or no, I hate that. But it doesn't force you into action yet, right? So if it's a circumstance where we have to do something in that, circumstance, typically, or if it's something that's not immediate, like food is immediate, but if it's a circumstance in the future, we start thinking about it. Well, I really don't want to do that, or I really want to do that, and we start creating that buildup of emotion inside of us, of thoughts inside of us that make us decide, go from I like that to I'm going to do this, or I don't like that to the point where we're going to say I'm just going to get rid of this, whatever it is. So it doesn't happen automatically and instantaneously. It takes some time. So Amma has said that our likes and dislikes basically make us divide this world into two. The things that we find pleasant, the things that we find unpleasant. If there's anything in the middle, it's typically because we don't have much experience with that thing. We're not quite sure whether we like it or dislike it. You meet a new person and then it's not like the computer is analyzing as you go. But you're like, as a new person, you're neutral to that person. But within 5-10 minutes, you may already have decided that you don't like this person. And then that person goes in the dislike box. And then you're like, oh, this says, oh, I like your necktie, or like, oh, that's a really cool shirt you're wearing. And it's like, he goes into the like box. It's just so mechanical. It's not like you thought, okay, now I'm going to add him to the like box. It just, in Facebook you can like things, Are they going to start like dislike? I don't know if they're going to do that, but that would be how our mind functions. Everything ticks off one box or the other. So what Krishna is trying to tell Arjuna is that you can actually make it a much more conscious process. You can catch that process before it compels you to action. And you can look very carefully and see, okay, I know I have certain vasanas, certain tendencies. I don't want to be a slave of all of them. Some of them may be good. Like, let's say I'm a really neat person. That's a good vasana. Remember, Amma says not all vasanas are bad. Some of them are good. And what we're trying to do in an ashram is create good vasanas, good tendencies, like, spiritual discipline and a taste for devotion, a taste for spiritual wisdom, like Krishna's wisdom. So we're trying to change our vasanas. So there will be good vasanas. So if we can sort those out from the ones that are not helping our spiritual growth, that would be an example of how he's saying you don't have to be a slave to your nature. And our lives, it's important to remember that our lives are always governed by one thing or another. Either they're governed by our vasanas, our tendencies, or they're governed by spiritual principles or Amma's instructions. So it's one or the other, basically a higher principle or that innate tendency that is pushing us from our subconscious level. So the karma yogi is trying to be discerning so that he chooses which things influence his mind, only the ones that he wants. Now I'm going to show you something on the whiteboard. It's been hidden away because I didn't want you to get distracted. I might have shown this at one point or another, but if you've seen it before, consider it a review. Can you help me move it over? Come a little farther forward. Okay. Does this make sense? Can you see it? Everybody see it? You cannot see it? Oh, it's a smiley face. Good, she added a little personal touch. All right. Skype people, I'm sorry, I don't know if you can hear me. Maybe you can bring it a little closer over here. So, this is sort of my attempt to put this in a graphical format. I don't know if you can read it. I will read it out loud to you guys. And there's a printout here in case anybody wants to take a photocopy afterwards. Maybe Brunesh can keep that on the table over there.
Right.
So we'll have it available for people to take photographs if they want. Consider it's copyright Amma because it's not mine. But so he's saying you're born with this inborn tendency, right? So we have certain karmas. So we're born in America or India or whatever, and then you have this some kind of vasanas or personality. The personality composition of our mind. So based on that, like we said, we have these reactions to circumstances in life. This one says first thought. So like let's say Dea Devi walks in the room and like we said, there's palak paneer on the table. The first thought is, oh yum, right? But then they'll say like, no, we're not serving dinner yet. Just have to wait over here for a little while. The auto says, no, it's still 7 minutes left, or something like that. And then we haven't prayed yet, right, for example. So that means, especially if you're a kid, because kids get excited over these things more, but adults do, they're just better at hiding it. And so you're looking at it and you're thinking, oh boy, I really just can't wait to eat that stuff. And it's so tasty. And we all have our own version of that, right? So then let's say that's like a half an hour or an hour. The longer you're thinking about eating that thing or enjoying that circumstance, or it can be the opposite. It can be that thing you dislike, and it's just like hanging over your head for a long time. You have to meet somebody you don't want to meet, and you gotta go meet that person. Oh, it's gonna be so bad. So the longer we think about that, the more we get an emotional buildup, right? That buildup of emotion in our minds becomes like a tidal wave, and it's like we get so upset and we maybe can't even sleep at night. So then what happens is that it by force expresses itself in our words and actions. So, Amma has said that, let's say you have a bad experience with somebody, and, if you think, oh, next time I see that guy, I'm going to really give him a piece of my mind. If you think that over and over again, when you meet, you're definitely going to do something like that. There's very little hope that you guys are going to kiss and make up or, become friends again. If you do it the other way though, you can say like, oh, maybe I'm going to try to have a, really constructive, nice and friendly talk with that person, and we'll become friends again. So there's more likelihood that it'll be expressed that way in your actions. So whatever that emotional buildup is, that is what's most likely to take place in our words and actions. And the more we repeat certain behavioral patterns, then we get habitual words and actions, right? We get this tendency. And Amma says that if you have a piece of paper, and you write a line once, it's really easy to erase. But if you write a line like 20 times in the same place over and over again, it creates a deep groove in the paper and it's very hard to erase it after that. So that becomes a habitual pattern in our behavior. Then what happens is, it's not just your actions and your speech, it's also your thoughts. And the subtle body, the subconscious mind, it becomes a really deep impression. And what happens when this body falls away? The body's gone, and the body with which we did all those habitual actions is gone. But the subtle body is what carries the impressions. Amma says it's like a tape recorder recording all of our thoughts, words, and actions. So those impressions are etched into the subtle body. They don't go away. So those impressions are deep in the mind, and they transform the subtle body. There's a transformation of the subtle body that takes place. So the subtle body you came into this world with is now different at age 47 almost, right? So I had one subtle body then, I have a different subtle body now. If there's another birth for me, please not Amma, but It's up to me, not up, whether I live to Amma's teachings properly, and Amma's grace if I don't. So if there is another birth, then that means that subtle body, not the one I was born with, but the one that how I molded it over those years, that's the one that's going to come with me into my next birth. That's my next inborn tendency. Right? So this looks like this is what you call samsara. This is what you call the chain or the endless cycle of birth and death. So it's hopeless? What do you guys think?
No.
It's not hopeless. Krishna says it's not hopeless. Amma says it's not hopeless. But where do we get to express our hope? Anybody who has not already heard me talk about this one? Yes, I know you haven't heard Punya. Where's their hope here for us? Except for the smiley face in the middle. Where's that? Where? Here? Okay, if you what? If you think about Amma constantly, when? Every time you're doing something? Or all the time, all day long? All the time. Wow, that's great. All right, guys, you heard it. That's it. Think about Amma all day long. You heard it from the master. Anybody find it difficult to do that some of the time? See, it's easier for kids. No, kids, you guys are way better at it than we are, I know. The adults are all boring. They have all kinds of problems. And they just, they're always thinking about stuff they have to do and stress and all that. So that's why they can't remember Amma. So if you can remember Amma all day long, you're golden. What else can we do to try and break this chain? If this is a chain that can be broken, where's the weak link that we can break it without using our free will? Yes?
So Swamiji, that relationship that Amma talks about of self-effort and her grace, and how those two are so intertwined.
True.
It's so easy because of Amma's mothering nature for us to just see and hope that Amma will bail us.
Mm-hmm.
Because that's what mothers do for you, right?
Okay, right.
But Amma keeps saying, no, self-effort is absolutely
So where do you want this? Where do you make the self-effort in this?
first thoughts.
First thought?
As soon as you become aware that the thought is vasana driven, if you don't correct it there, it just goes downhill so fast.
Okay, someone's raising their hand very quick. Okay.
Well, I would just say that it's in the repetition of thoughts. Because when it keeps coming up, you're like, wait, I have to stop this. I have to start thinking differently. Let me chant my mantra. Let me go meditate. Let me sing a bhajan. Let me do something to stop the repetition.
If you Britton, the whole family's chiming in. Okay, Britton, tell us what you have to say. Tell us.
But sometimes you would like to do that, and you know that's the right thing to do, but you have a habit of not doing it.
Right, that's the question that Arjuna is going to ask next week. Very good. So you're going to hear the answer. Krishna is going to answer your question next week, if I'm here next week. Yes, I'm here next week. Yeah. This is then the Saturday I leave, so I'll be here on Friday. I think it's like the Mark Twain thing. The reports of my death have been highly exaggerated, really exaggerated. The reports of my not being able to do the class have been exaggerated.
I thought you're doing the retreat in Santa Rosa next week.
I am. I'm flying out on Saturday morning. Yeah, but I thought I'll just do the Gita class and then fly out early the next morning.
Okay.
Yeah. That's how it is. So anyhow, the thing is, let's say if you were to say to yourself, hold yourself responsible for preventing that first thought from taking place. Then what happens is, it's like what he said in verse 33, you're trying to suppress that nature, right? And it's like, let's say Shane, she puts the onions on the table or something like that, or he comes in here and he's, I'm so hungry, and he sees a big bowl of onions, He'll be like, oh God, I shouldn't have had that thought, oh no, evil thought, I have to get rid of all my likes and dislikes, right? So, and then we start condemning ourselves if we judge those thoughts, the reactions to the circumstances. If we,
From my personal experiences, it's at the level of the emotional buildup.
Okay.
Because I find that, the other two happen sometimes so fast.
Yeah.
Then I notice that there's an emotional buildup, and that's maybe just where I'm at right now, but that's where I can say to myself, okay, this is really this
out of
is
control.
building up. Right?
Yeah.
To figure out a way to stop thinking about it is a great thing if you can do that.
Right.
But if those thoughts keep coming, you can say to yourself, let's not let this emotion get out of hand to the point where it's going to lead to the words and actions.
Right.
Let's at least neutralize the emotional component and try to have words and actions that are at least neutral, even if you can't stop the repetitive thoughts. You know, try to look at both sides.
So if we go reverse, basically, this is actually kind of, let's just go backwards. Intentionally do words and actions that will facilitate your spiritual growth, even if your mind says, I don't want to do them, you know? So it's like create positive habits, right? So if you do those, then in the process of doing that, hopefully you start, it replaces the emotional buildup with something constructive. Instead of being worrying, like sometimes at night if you can't go to bed, and you're just worrying about things, it's probably better to get up and just read Amma's book or something like that, because you're awake anyhow. Your mind is anyhow active. So engage it in something spiritual instead of just worrying about something. So it's replacing the negative emotional buildup with something, positive emotions, uplifting emotions, to try and break that emotional buildup. If you do that, if you get in the habit of sort of cutting the emotional buildup before it gets to become a tsunami, so it's like having a seawall, I guess you would say, then that helps you to catch the repetition of thoughts before it gets out of control, right? It's not going to happen just on its own. So mantra is really good. Mantra is really good here. So if you find yourself repeating a thought, just be like, hey, no, we're going to repeat the mantra instead. And has anybody heard the stories that Amma has told about Pranavamritananda Swami, Big Swami's younger brother? Yeah. Or you might have read about it in the Amma's biography or one of her books, or even in his own book, I don't remember. He used to just be so obsessive about his mantra. He would just chant it all day long. And Amma used to love the fact that he would chant it all day long because it was setting a good example. And people would make fun of him because he would chant the mantra so much that he would get bubbles on the side of his mouth. Huh? Like foam. He would get like foam on the side of his mouth. Without stopping. And Suganachan, Amma's father, he used to chant mantra very intensely like that too. And Amma had said, I remember, saying that if you chant your mantra with that much intensity, there's no scope for negative thoughts to come in your mind. So it's an example of how to avoid that repetition, just replace it with the mantra. I mean, it's a big just, it's a big if, but it's an example of how to stop that cycle. And then if we do all these things and we develop positive habits, assumedly, by the end of this life, we've transformed the subtle body in a positive way. So that next life, maybe the first thoughts, or at least, even within the scope of this life, you can look at yourself when you were younger, much more immature. The first thoughts we used to have at that time, compared with now, we're much more mature in our outlook on life. So, assumedly, maybe not. So the first thoughts are probably more constructive, better now. But it'll get even better the more we work on this whole chain of effects. So this is an attempt at a graphical representation of what he's put in this chapter. And I'm going to wrap up this verse and try to leave time for questions if there are any. So just as a concrete example, let's say you just like sweets, right? And then you go to the doctor because you're not feeling well or something, and you find out that you're diabetic. Or a person finds out they're diabetic. The next day, your friend invited you to a party. So you go there, and the sweets all over the place. And people are offering them to you. Please, you should have some of this cake and this and that. And you know that you're diabetic, and you have to be very careful, right? So the first thought, or that inborn tendency, is going to plant that first thought in your mind. Oh, I love those things, look so good. And then the more you're in that room and dwelling on it, you're going to say, I want to eat it, I want to eat it. And the mind will start rationalizing, it's okay, you can go home and take an insulin injection, it'll all be fine, don't worry about it. But it's that constant repetition of the thought about, I want it, I want it, I want it, that makes us get to the point where we say, I'm going to eat it, and we actually eat it. So, Amma's saying it's a question of what you nurture, which thoughts you nurture and nourish in your mind. So if you can ask yourself, well, is it really good for me? I actually, I have to deal with it. I have to fix my condition rather than making it worse. And like Bhuvanesh was saying before, it becomes that emotional buildup inside. We have to redirect the mind in a positive direction. And that's actually why we have this ashram. The whole purpose of this ashram is to help us redirect that thought flow in a positive directions towards spirituality. Did you raise your hand, Diallo?
So basically, I'm thinking like self-inquiry. Like even from the beginning, you're doing it, but then you start inquiring within, like, well, what is this thought? What's causing it?
Exactly, because now if we look at it this way, you can ask yourself, well, which vasana is it that's making me so interested in this and attached to it? Especially people who have bad habits. Not that people here have bad habits, but, let's say it's like smoking or drinking or really unhealthy foods or something like that. It's definitely, we can say to ourselves, this is not right. Why? Where's this vasana coming from? What is it inside of me that's making me want to do this thing? It's definitely not good for me. So we can, if we appeal to the intellect or the intellectual level, it gives us objectivity to those sort of more instinctual attractions that are just coming from our inherited tendencies in this life. So it is like self-reflection or self-analysis, self-inquiry.
Who's the one who really wants this?
Yeah, that's another way of looking at it, a more Vedantic way of looking at it. So what Amma, that's another reason why Amma encourages us all to get a mantra and chant it, because the more you chant your mantra, the more it slows down that thought process, because we have heightened awareness. She says first have awareness in your actions. That itself is progress. Remember where you put your phone and your keys and your glasses and things like that. We always, just little things like that we lose track of. So to keep track of your thoughts is a much more subtle process. So for that, we use the mantra. And as the mantra, as we practice the mantra more and more, we develop a heightened inner awareness of the thoughts. And what I find, you can try it in your own experience, is that the more our awareness of our thoughts increases, it's almost as though that thought process is slowing down. Because like Bhuvanesh said, it feels like the gap between the inborn tendency and maybe the words and the actions itself is so short. It can just feel like it happened in an instant. But the more we become aware of that thought process inside, it's like that thing that seemed like a very short gap. There's enough awareness that you can catch it or at least nip it in the bud before it gets out of control. And I want to share with you one last example that came to me when I was on an airplane, because it was a very graphical representation of what I'm trying to explain to you verbally. I was on a flight many years ago, maybe 10 plus years ago, and there, just time passing, looking at the monitor and flipping through the channels. And there was this, I didn't even know anything about this whole series of movies, the Matrix movies. And I was like, Matrix, that sounds interesting, And then I just put some random part of the movie, and you can see how these guys, the special effects in this movie was so spellbinding, and I had been reading some spiritual text, I don't remember what it was, and I'm watching, this guy shoots a gun, the bullet comes out of the gun and is flying towards the guy, and they go in slow motion, and he goes backwards, like this, and the bullet misses him just by like a nanomillimeter, right? And I was thinking, this is exactly what I'm talking about, because we have these tendencies, vasanas inside of us, and it's like they're out to get us sometimes, it feels like that. And if you want to evade the attack of the vasanas, they may be attacking at lightning speed, right? Like the bullet, he's not slowing down the bullet, but he's slowing down time itself, basically, and going backwards so that he can evade the bullet. So like that, when people do things to us and say things to us that evoke or evince a emotional reaction, if we have a heightened self-awareness, it's almost kind of like the guys in the Matrix, where it's like you can evade the attack of your vasanas and keep your mind from being disturbed. So with that, we'll conclude today's class. And next week, we're going to get an answer to Breton's question is, what if you want to do something, but something inside is keeping you from doing that, even though you know that's the right thing to do? What are you supposed to do? So next week, we'll find out. Questions?
So I find this happens to me at school a lot, where I'll be focusing on one thing, and then, somebody will come up to me and say something, and I'll find myself like saying or doing something without, thinking about it. And I'm wondering if there's some way, we can stop it, even when we get, surprised by
So because when you're studying, your mind is focused on that, and you're sort of in a different world, so to speak, and you're definitely not thinking of what that person walks up to you and asks about. So you don't have the presence of mind, I guess, to sort of switch channels really easily like that.
Yeah.
Okay. So how do we keep ourselves? So what's the final question of that sequence?
I guess, is there something we can do to stop that, or or get around, like just sort of reacting?
Reactive.
Right? Yeah.
Yeah, okay. All right, so it's not so much about your example, I guess. It's just more about how do we avoid sort of reactive behavior.
Yeah.
That's what it is, no? Okay, so it's very similar to what we're talking about here.
Yeah.
Self-awareness, I think what we just talked about is very important. I mean, and like Diallo was saying, the self-reflection or self-inquiry, understanding. So, in the first place, what is my inherited tendency? What are my relative strengths and weaknesses, and what are these tendencies that I have that compel me into action? Maybe I am aware of some of them, but not all of them. I mean, I know these self-help groups where they go around and they just ask each other to tell them, you ask your friends who know you well, tell me what it is about me. Because sometimes it's like you can't see your own nose, right? So it's just it's so close to us that we lose sight of it. So becoming more aware of those tendencies that we have, and that self-awareness, not just of our personality, but then using the mantra to become more aware of the thoughts. I would say that there's no shortcut other than awareness, because being able to switch like that, and just pausing, I would say developing the habit of thinking before we speak. Amma says, thinking first before we act is the number one rule. And just pausing, just contemplate for a minute. Some people are the extreme in that side. What they do is they just kind of freeze, and they don't know what to say, and then there's just a lot of thinking going on, but nothing's actually happening. And I know there's another brahmachari, some brahmacharis in the ashram, they just do a lot of action without thinking, and Amma would be like, you don't use your head, Viveka buddhi ille, she'll say like that. Don't you have any, intellect and discrimination? And then other people will just think and think and think, and they won't do anything, because they're stuck, in that thought process. So it's the balance of the two that we need to cultivate. Yeah. Let me show you. Yes.
Can I add a practical note? Because I'm in
Sure.
that's my life.
Yeah.
Hanging around like that, And what I find is that if I can first tell someone where I'm at, then it really helps the situation. I can say, it's going to take me a second to digest what you just said, or something like that.
Yeah.
Or, I just need a second. I got to shift gears here, you know, so, you know, in order to answer your question, I'm gonna have to shift gears, so can you repeat that, or, you know, something like that, right, you know, so that really helps me a lot.
Another thing that I find is repeating to the person what they just said to you.
Yeah.
Repeating, so, okay, wait a second. Let me just make sure I got it. You know, is this what you're asking me? And I mean, that's what I just did, actually. I was like trying to make sure I knew what you were asking, you know, because oftentimes we go off in the big, you know, explanation or discussion, and then we find out that what they're really interested in is something else. So repeating what they said, and and then like I was actually totally in another world. Let me just see if I understood you properly.
Buys you a little time.
Yeah. Another thing that I wasn't sure whether to talk about, but I think it's relevant here, that'll be the last thing I'll say, is that by nature, some people's minds are multitasking, and some people's minds are good at staying focused on one thing. You know, and I find that the people who are able to stay focused on one thing are really good at nurturing things, you know, and the people who are able to multitask many things at one time, kind of like, you know, they're able to respond quickly to things, but they also find it a little harder to stay focused on one thing for a long time. So you can also, you know, do some self-reflection and see. Because, you know, I know people in the ashram, we have both types in India especially. You know, people who are just, they can't multitask at all. Yeah. And they're in something, you know, and then you'll be like talking with them, and then you can just be talking for like 10 minutes, and they'll be like, did you say something? You know, because they have that ability to focus. That's a good quality. So it's not necessarily a bad thing, you know. Whereas, and then, like we said, your nature. Use it, leverage that for a good purpose instead of trying to be a multitasker. Not you, but, you know, if a person's a multitasker, then, and they can't focus like somebody else, maybe that's just the trade-off, you know, and then vice versa. So that's another point for self-reflection.
You can kind of figure out what you are and then balance it.
Yeah, exactly. Like the Ayurvedic Prakriti, you know, it's like if I know I'm Vata, then I know that I have to be careful of these kind of foods. But it doesn't mean that I'm going to suddenly become kapha, you know. I'm never going to become that. So, okay, so a lot of good discussion. We'll end for today, and then we will resume next Friday. So we'll chant the first two mantras and have a short meditation. Asato ma satgamaya, tamaso ma jyotirgamaya, mrityorma amritam gamaya. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Lokaha Samastaha Sukhino Bhavantu. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. So, those whose schedule permits, please remain with us. But this is the official ending time. If anybody has to go, it's okay. So if you're able to stay for the meditation, then please close your eyes. Keep your spine and neck straight. And slow down your breathing. With each long, deep breath, feel your mind relaxing further and further. Try to feel Amma's subtle presence here with us. Feel her subtle energy all around you, embracing you and pervading within you. Now focus your awareness on the rhythm of your breathing. Be fully conscious of each and every breath. Let your mind glide along harmoniously with each inhalation and exhalation from start to finish. When we focus on the breathing process in this way, the mind becomes more and more subtle, giving us a heightened awareness of the thought process. Try to dive deeper and deeper within. And anytime a restless thought arises, try to witness it, observing it enter and pass through your mind. Whenever a thought arises, try to witness it like a cloud passing in the sky, without judging good or bad, mine, and so forth. Just witness it. as the thoughts dissolve and the mind reaches a stable, peaceful state. The spring of bliss and joy deep within us begins to flow, and we can savor its taste. Allow yourself to abide in that state for some more time. Now let us open our hearts and pray to the Divine Mother, invoking the innocence of a small child towards its mother. O Divine Mother of this universe, O my beloved Amma, please help this child remember you every minute of the day. When I forget you, Amma, my mind drags me towards various objects, seeking happiness in this world of change and suffering. Don't let my mind go there, Amma. Please keep me close to you. Help me remember you so that when my mind seeks temporary pleasures in the world, I can keep it focused on what is permanent, what gives lasting happiness. That is you, Amma. Fuel the fire of my devotion so that I'll never be able to spend a moment without thinking of you. Help me become more and more devoted to you every day. I will conclude with the final mantra. Om Purnamada Purnamidam Purnaat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om. Long deep breath, and as you exhale, slowly open your eyes. Vishwaya, and see you tomorrow, next week, whenever. Vishwaya.